Hello, good morning. I'm Dr. Amrit Sethi. We had done a couple of lectures before the COVID together. I hope you guys remember me. Um, so it's about 7 a.m. over here and in San Francisco. I'm recording this session for Ordemi, the RDA EF program. It's really good to be able to connect with you guys again. I apologize for not being actively involved in the online program up till now. The way COVID has hit us and affected us in different ways. Um, but I've heard from Dr. Jamani that you guys are doing a really good job with transitioning to the online program, and she has done a lot of hard work. It's really commendable, the amount of challenges that she has had to face, and she's taken care of everything from doing the labs outdoors, and then we had the smoke and the fire. Hope you guys are doing well, your families have been safe, and you guys are taking care of yourselves during this difficult time. I'm going to be doing the lecture today on cord packing. If you guys have any questions or any issues, please feel free to reach out to me. I will share my email through Google Classroom if you guys don't have it already. Disclaimer, if there is a 3-year-old in the background, my son is probably woken up, so but hopefully not. So I'm going to start sharing my slides now. Okay. So today I'm going to be talking about cord packing and the tissue management during cord packing and how to take final impression for crowns. I'm sure you guys might be experts on taking provisional restoration crowns and just taking impression in patients day to day. And the importance of making a good temporary which has a good fit, and it's the bite is good with it as well. So we will talk about the cord packing today. So cord packing and final impressions are an inevitable part of day-to-day general dentistry. You can't be working in a dental office and say that, no, I don't want to do cord packing, or I don't know how to do cord packing, and take final impressions. Even though I've been to one situation where I was shadowing this dentist before I went to dental school, and she would just laser all her impression, but she had to take out the laser, but she would prefer that to cord packing. But I've never seen anybody else do that. um, Obviously there is a learning curve associated with cord packing and taking final impressions. You learn as you go, and every now and then, even I struggle with these procedures. Sometimes there's too much bleeding, there's too much saliva, or the tooth is really far in the back, or there's some malocclusion. So these are the challenges that we face every day, and we're going to address them today. But we have to make sure that the final outcome, that the crown is a good fit, and it's functional. So for that, we really need to do our best in taking a good impression, for which cord packing is very important. Okay, so what is the first step towards getting that final outcome? It all starts with treatment planning. Is there pain in the tooth? If there is pain, does the tooth need a root canal? If the tooth needs a root canal, then you guys must be knowing that the blood and the nerve supply of the tooth is not there anymore, which makes the tooth brittle. So that's why we need a crown to protect the tooth and to protect the root canal that has been just done on the patient. Sometimes, there are cases where, of course, the cost is a factor, or once the pain is gone, the patient is not interested in getting the crown done. But I make sure when I am treatment planning for the crown, I tell them the importance about doing the crown. Otherwise, there is literally no point of doing the root canal. I hate to see patients where, they come back with a cracked tooth which we cannot restore anymore, and they had, taken all the money, time, and effort to do the root canal. So I make it very clear about the importance of doing the crown after getting a root canal done. And of course, the risk of fracture is more if it's a bruxer, or there is so sometimes there is gross decay that might involve a cusp or large amalgam or composite fillings with recurrent decay, which have a potential for fracture, especially if the patient is a bruxer or living in a high stress environment like we are these days in the pandemic. I actually read an article that was mentioning that the doctors are seeing a lot more emergencies which are related to crown fracture in the last couple months. I think an average of six per week is something that I read. And it's because that I think the stress that we are living in these times has never been there before. And people are managing work with kids, and it's a big challenge. I really don't know how everyone is doing it. So, the next part is that we have to make sure that the tooth is restorable before we start these procedures for crown and even the root canal, to make sure that there's enough tooth structure remaining to actually restore the crown. I'm going to show you guys a video which explains the ferrule effect that helps us gauge if we have enough tooth structure or not.
Welcome back. In clinical practice, restoring an extensively damaged tooth is itself a challenge, and also the failures to post and core are also that common. The extent of longevity greatly depends on how much the restoration or crown embraces the tooth structure. For that, we need to know something which is called as ferrule and ferrule effect. So today, that itself is the topic of our discussion. So, So ferrule, it is derived from the word ferrum, which means iron, and variola, which means bracelet. So ferrule, it is a ring or cap, typically a metal one which strengthens the end of a handle or tube and prevents it from splitting or wearing. So in the figure we can see that to the barrel there are multiple metal rings which are surrounded in a 360-degree fashion. These metal plates, they strengthen the barrel and prevent it from splitting or wearing. Similarly, in the next figure we can see that there is a water pipe. So over this water pipe there is a metal nut which acts as ferrule, and this metal nut, it prevents the pipe from the breakage. So the main purpose of the ferrule is to protect the core or the base material from splitting or wearing or breakage. Then what is ferrule in dentistry? So ferrule in the earlier days was misinterpreted as the amount of remaining tooth structure. So if we see the figure, first figure, this is the remaining or residual tooth structure after the preparation. So in the earlier concepts, this tooth structure was considered as ferrule, but this is not the case. The intaglio surface of the crown would always be in contact with the residual tooth structure. So if we see the colored area in the first figure, this is the portion of the intaglio surface of the crown which is in contact with the residual tooth structure. So this band is present in a 360-degree fashion. So this encircling band of cast metal which is in contact with the coronal surface or remaining tooth structure is called as ferrule. So basically ferrule is related to the prosthesis or crown which we cement over the tooth surface and not the remaining tooth structure. So in the simple words, if we say ferrule is that portion of the prosthesis or crown which is in contact with the residual tooth structure. Just remember that in this case, the portion of the crown which is in contact with the core build-up material is not considered. Only that portion of the crown which is in contact with the tooth structure is considered as ferrule. So on cementing the prosthesis, this shaded area, it forms a ferrule and forms a 360-degree metal which encircles the tooth surface and braces the tooth. So this ferrule, it prevents the independent flexure of the tooth or core or post structures. So this ultimately provides resistance to the dislodgement and it prevents the fracture of the prosthesis. So this effect of the ferrule of providing the resistance to dislodgement and preventing the tooth from the fracture itself is called as ferrule effect.
So the video itself is longer than that, and I'll share the link if you guys want to see more. But I just wanted to give you a basic idea about what ferrule is, and it's almost a difficult concept to explain. So I really like this video, and even the barrel thing, even I did not know that that's the reason why it's called ferrule before. So I'm learning as I'm teaching. Um, so then the next part is the sequencing of the treatment. So we need to treatment plan the crown in the right sequence, and if pain is associated with the tooth, then we want to make sure the patient is out of pain. So we get started with the root canal if it's indicated, and we also want to make sure. But in most cases, we always start with perio first. We have to make sure that the gums are healthy. If the gums are healthy, we'll do a simple cleaning. But if there are pockets which are 5 millimeters or more, then we have to do the scaling and root planing, and we have to wait for the gums to heal from the scaling and root planing, and then we can start the crown procedure. And this is the most important factor that affects the long term of the crown success. And we will see some slides in the upcoming week. What it makes it really hard if the gums are not, it's bleeding, and just taking the impression, cord packing itself is also very challenging. So we want to make sure that the gums are healthy. And once the gum disease is stabilized, we can go ahead with the crown procedure. If the prognosis is poor or questionable, if the pockets are more than 7 or 8 millimeters, it's a good idea to get a second opinion from a periodontist. And if there is grade 3 mobility and there is periodontal abscess, if you think that the long term it's better to take out the tooth and plan for an implant than going for root canal and crown. And if there is hypertrophic tissue, then we might need to laser it and get it out of the way either during the crown prep procedure or before it. If there is lack of attached gingiva, that also will affect the final outcome of the crown. And we will talk more about it in the coming slides. We will also go over the preparation technique, impression technique, and temporization. A smooth and well-fitting temporary promotes the tissue health, which is something that you might have seen in your day-to-day work. The final restoration and fit is more important for aesthetics, function, and the long-term success of the crown. So what is the purpose of tissue retraction? Exposure of the subgingival finish line. We need to be able to see the margins of the crown that we need to record for our impression. So the third point is inspection of the finish line. And that's one of the reasons that we need to to cord packing. And controlling of the bleeding and moisture. The cord absorbs some amount of the blood and moisture and keeps the area dry when we are taking our final impression. So what are the retraction techniques that are available to us? Woven cord impregnated with chemicals. This is the most common technique that we use. We always try and use the double cord technique. The chemicals help prevent the bleeding, and I will be discussing them in detail in the upcoming slides. Non-impregnated cord. What is non-impregnated cord? It's a retraction cord that is braided together for quick absorption and allowing it to be used immediately and effectively. The braided retraction material is made of cotton fiber that will not split or collapse in the sulcus. Electrosurgery and combination of the cord and electrosurgery are other techniques which we will discuss. And curettage with stone while cutting the preparation finish lines are some of the other ways that we do to obtain the gingival retraction. Okay. So moisture control. Moisture control is very important to get a good impression. These are some of the techniques that we use to control saliva. I'm sure you guys are much too familiar with the saliva ejector, isolite, and cotton rolls. I like to move the saliva ejector close to the area where I'm packing the cord, but not too close, so that the cord is not being displaced by the suction, but it maintains a dry field. Isolite also does a great job with moisture control during the crown prep and the cord placement, but we need to take it out before taking the final impression. I always use cotton rolls in the buccal sulcus while taking impression and while cord packing if isolite is not available. There is another technique that involves using anti-sialogogues. So what are anti-sialogogues? They are the dosage that we give is banthine is 50 milligrams and probanthine is 15 milligrams. So these are to be administered to the patient 1 hour before the appointment. Personally, I have never used anti-sialogogues, but it's good to know, if it's really hard to work on a patient with existing moisture controlling techniques, and sometimes the isolite is not comfortable for the patients and they gag, so it's good to know about just like another thing that you can use for the patient if you know that he has too much saliva and hard to work with him in general. Then we talk about the techniques that are moisture control, in which the blood is the factor. So we have a chemico-mechanical technique, which is the retraction cord is the part which is the mechanical part, and the chemicals below are the ones that we use for retraction. So we have aluminium potassium sulfate. The ions from alum neutralize the charges on plasma proteins, causing the plasma proteins to clump together, which leads to hemostasis, and it controls the bleeding. As compared to epinephrine, alum has lesser tissue shrinkage and better tissue recovery, so it heals better. Epinephrine is better at tissue retraction. It is more effective, and the hemostatic capacities are also better. But alum is good to use when epinephrine is contraindicated, as it has less systemic effects. And then we have plain without any chemicals, and epinephrine, which is primarily constricting the small arterioles. So epinephrine is the most widely used agent. It acts as a vasoconstrictor and a hemostatic agent. In practice, epinephrine can be used in a concentration of 0.01% or 4% or 8% to keep the gingival sulcus dry during the impression process. The disadvantages are that it can cause the rise in blood pressure and heart rate due to absorption of the local epinephrine into the circulation. Epinephrine is contraindicated if the patient has any cardiovascular disease, hypertension, or the patient is taking monoamine oxidase or tricyclic antidepressants or cocaine, which I hope is not the case. Chemical astringents. Aluminium chloride is an astringent that acts by precipitation of tissue proteins and vascular constriction. Its vascular constrictor effects are less than epinephrine. Among the medical impregnated cords, it causes the least amount of irritation. Alum is the aluminium potassium sulfate. Hemostatic agents that inhibit the intercapillary plasma protein immigration and disrupt bleeding through vasoconstriction and precipitation of tissue proteins on the superficial layer of the mucosa. Then we have ferric or ferrous sulfate and ferric chloride. Ferric sulfate is also known as Monsell's solution. It has been widely used in gingival displacement. We know Viscostat is one of these products. So its action is slightly more effective than epinephrine in gingival displacement. Recovery of the tissue is good, but it's recommended to be used for about 3 minutes. But it has corrosive effects. So it can cause injury to the enamel and soft tissues, and it can cause tooth staining. These properties are attributed to the high acidity of the solution. So if we are using these products, we have to make sure we rinse them off properly before taking the impression. And it's good to use desensitizing agents to avoid post-operative sensitivity. Then we have electrosurgery. So electrosurgery, after the local anesthesia, we pass an electric current through a thin wire so that a trough can be prepared in the gingival sulcus adjacent to the finishing line, and that also makes the hemostasis achieved. And then we have the rotary curettage, in which a trough is prepared with a diamond burr in the gingival sulcus adjacent to the finishing line area following the administration of local anesthesia. Okay, so now we come to the anatomy part of which is related to the cord packing. So we have a gingival crevice or gingival sulcus. So what is a gingival sulcus? It is a groove or a fissure or furrow. There need to be two structures with a small space in between them to create a sulcus. So on the slide, we have a tooth. On one side, we have the tooth or the cementum, and the other side, we have the gingival margin. What is the shape of the crevice? It is a V-shaped crevice, and its base is where the epithelium attaches to the root. I have another video that explains the sulcus anatomy and histology in great detail for who are interested in understanding which type of cells are there. I'm going to go over the first 4-5 minutes of the video so we can get to see how it works. Just give me a moment. Okay, sorry about that.
The gingival sulcus and the adjacent sulcular epithelium. So without wasting much time, I welcome you all to the Perio Hub, and let's get started. So here we see a clinical picture of the maxilla and the mandible, and in the previous broadcast we discussed in detail about how gingiva can be anatomically divided into marginal gingiva, attached gingiva and the interdental papilla. So here if we try and insert a periodontal probe, which is nothing but an instrument to assess the periodontal status. So if we insert this probe between the marginal gingiva and the tooth structure, it enters into a space, and this space is termed as the gingival sulcus or the gingival crevice. So let's see a schematic diagram to understand this better. So here, as you can see, this probe is entering into a space, and this space is called as the gingival sulcus. So the GPT, which is the glossary of periodontal terms, defines the gingival sulcus or the crevice as a shallow fissure between the marginal gingiva and the enamel or the cementum. So let's break this definition down for better understanding. So the first half of the definition states that it is a shallow fissure. Now fissure is nothing but a narrow opening between two structures, and here the two structures are the marginal gingiva on one side. So here we see that this is the marginal gingiva, which is otherwise also called as the free gingiva, and on the other end we have the enamel or the cementum. So here we have the cemento-enamel junction right here, and this would be our enamel, and here we have our cementum. So the gingival sulcus on one end will have either the cementum or enamel, and on the other hand, on the other end, it will have the marginal gingiva. So let's talk about the boundaries of this gingival sulcus, and for that we see a zoomed in picture of this portion. So here we see the gingival sulcus, and the inner aspect of the gingival sulcus is bound by the tooth. So it can either be the enamel or the cementum. Now the outer aspect of the probe is lined by an epithelium, and here the epithelium is termed as the sulcular epithelium. And in the coronal aspect, it is bound by the marginal gingiva or the free gingiva, and the apex or the base of the gingival sulcus is bound by the junctional epithelium. So here we heard two terms, the sulcular epithelium and the junctional epithelium. So we'll discuss about these a bit in detail now. So if we see the schematic diagram and orient ourselves, this would be our tooth structure. So we have the enamel here, and this is our root aspect, which is bound by a layer of cementum. And right here, this V-shaped groove is our gingival sulcus. And this pinkish area which is shaded is the epithelium. Now there are three types of epithelium which is present in the oral cavity. The first type of epithelium is called as the sulcular epithelium because it lines the gingival sulcus. The second most important part is the oral epithelium. It is otherwise called as the outer epithelium, and it is the epithelium which is present towards the external surfaces. And the third type of epithelium here is the junctional epithelium. Now the peculiar aspect of the junctional epithelium is that it is bound by a tooth structure. So here, as you can see, this yellowish shaded region, the junctional epithelium is bound by the layer of cementum. Whereas the sulcular epithelium and the oral epithelium does not have any tooth structure which is in contact with the epithelium.
So again, I'm just going ahead, pausing the video, and you guys can see it in more detail because she goes into a lot of detail about the histology, and it's always good to know more information, especially if you are interested in it. Okay, so we are going to talk about gingival retraction. What are the goals of gingival retraction? And basically it's something that we want to attain to make the impression, but we don't want to create a permanent damage to the gingiva. So it has to be done with a minimal degree of unintended alteration of the gingival tissue. And the proper retraction, it only displaces the lateral wall of the free gingiva and not the attachment, because we don't want to see recession after we do the cord packing, and we don't want to cause damage. That's the rule number one of doing anything. So we don't want to do any harm. So the treatment sequence is that the tooth is prepared up till the subgingival finish line, and then this is the preparation. The tooth is done, and then you can almost see that's about like a millimeter and a half. It changes from the depending on which material is the crown. So after the tooth preparation is done, We have to make sure that the crown, it has the exact same form and contour of the original tooth structure, so that we can avoid any problems in the future. So it is important to get a proper emergence profile, and for that the impression must capture at least 0.5 millimeters beyond the finish line. So this is the location of the gingiva. So in this case, you can see that the gingiva is covering the tooth part of the crown part of the tooth. And then in this case, it's on the cementum. So here it's on the enamel and here it's on the cementum, because there is pre-existing gingival recession. And you can see this, I'm sure you've seen this in your day-to-day dentistry, and you know how important it is to take care of this problem before you start addressing the crown, because subgingival and supragingival calculus will lead to gingival inflammation, which will lead to bleeding and which will cause a lot of problems before the taking the final impression, and then there can be more recession after doing the crown, so it can worsen the condition of the gingiva if it's not done in the right conditions. So yeah, we just spoke about this. What does the inflamed tissue do? It is difficult to control the bleeding. You cannot determine the finish location, that is the relative to the gingival height. You don't know where to place your margins, and then the recession is likely after the health improves as well. So to avoid those things, we have to address the periodontal health before we get started. So you can see over here, there is healthy but thin tissue with 1 to 2 millimeter sulcus. So, the cord packing procedure kind of differs depending upon the crown. And over here, there's a 7 millimeter pocket on the mesial. So, and you can see there is a gingival abscess. So it's one of those cases where you want to make sure the periodontist is on board with the long-term, prognosis of the crown. So, yeah, let's go ahead. So with thin facial tissue, there is a possibility of recession with preparation. And then we have to make sure that we actually place the margins a little bit subgingival in such cases, because we want to err in the case that if there is a recession, then the margins don't start showing. And you can see the effect of pad temporaries on the final outcome of the. So you can see over here, there's already some recession. Just if the temporaries were a better fit and were done better, then we could have avoided this problem. There's difficulty in taking impression, and recession is likely after the cementation, which can expose the finish line. So yeah, actually doing crowns on anterior teeth makes it a lot more challenging because of these reasons, because of the thinner gingiva. You have to take into account a lot of different things and make sure you're doing a very good job. So what is the purpose of tissue retraction? Number one, we have to be able to access the finish line, and needs to be the moisture control of blood and saliva. We have already discussed this in the previous slides. It's just a revision. Then there's inspection of the finish line, and you want to be able to expose the finish line so adequate impression can be made. This is such an important point that we're going to keep going over and over till you guys have it imprinted it into your head. What are the objectives of cord placement? So you want to be able to locate the cord within the gingival sulcus at or just apical to the finish line. I think it was mentioned in one of the previous slides that it has to be 0.5 millimeters. So that might be an important thing to remember for the exam. Avoidance of any trauma to the tissue. Placement of the free end of cord for easy and quick removal, and overlap the end in the area of thick gingiva. So we have to be able to place the cord in an area where it's easy to remove. I typically place it on the mesial surface of the crown prep. What are the types of cords available to us? So it is a personal preference. Once you start doing the cord packing, see that the different materials you have in your clinic, you will get to know, okay, I like this one and I don't like this other one. So the types of cords, one is braided and the other one is knitted. So using a retraction cord when making an impression, the braided cords have a tight and consistent weave. For many clinicians, they find it easier to place it in the sulcus with packing instruments, either the serrated or the non-serrated ones. And the knitting cords, they unravel, so they fray less when they are cut during the placement. So in theory, they say it's easier to place, but again, everybody has their own preference. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. In this case, the knitted ones, they actually expand when wet. So you have to take that in consideration when you're deciding which cord to pack. Maybe you can pack a smaller cord which is knitted, and because it will open the sulcus to a greater than the original diameter of the cord. I think it might be a good indication to use this if you're going to place one cord, so there's a good amount of opening of the sulcus. With either the braided or the knitted, there's a variety of diameters and sizes that allow for ease of placement in tighter and healthier gingival sulcus, and ultimately it's a personal preference. So when handling the gingival retraction cord, it is important to remember to use the latex-free gloves, because the contamination of the cord with latex, it will have deleterious effect on the setting of the PVS impression materials. So this is important because when the light body material is placed first into the sulcus, so if it does not cure completely, it can result in inaccuracies or tearing of the final fine gingival margin within the impression. So the drugs used for cord retraction, we have epinephrine and we have the alum or aluminium potassium sulfate. So we do know that the chemically impregnated cords, they offer better sulcus displacement because they have both a mechanical and chemical effect. And when these cords are used for duration less than 10 minutes, they cause minimal tissue damage. These chemicals, they can interfere with the surface details of the impression and with the dentin surface. So you have to thoroughly clean the dentin and make sure everything is clean before using a